Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're putting on our digital architect hats to figure out how web apps direct all their traffic. And our main tool for the job? Well, it's Flask routing, a really core feature of the popular Python web framework. So here's the game plan. We'll start with the absolute basics, what routing even is. Then, we'll map our very first URLs to functions. After that, we'll get into the really cool stuff, how to create a potentially infinite number of pages with just one piece of code. And finally, we'll touch on how to handle different user actions, like when someone submits a form. All right, let's dive in. Okay, so first things first. What exactly is the system that kind of acts like a GPS for your application?
I mean, think about it. When you click a link on a website that takes you to a URL ending in, say, /about or /profile, how in the world does the server on the other end know which piece of content to send back to your browser? It's not magic, right? Well, it's routing.
So at its heart, routing is basically the bridge that connects a specific URL to the code that actually builds the page you see. You can think of it as the rulebook for your app's addresses. It makes sure that when a user goes to a specific place, the right stuff gets displayed. It's probably the single most important feature of any web framework, really.
All right, let's get our hands dirty and build our first, most basic room in our digital house. In Flask, this is all about mapping a URL directly to a Python function.
Okay. Check this out. This right here, this is the fundamental building block of any Flask app. That @app.route thing, that's what we call a decorator. It's a slick piece of Python that basically wraps our function and tells Flask, hey, when someone visits the main page, the one that's just a single slash, I want you to run this index function right here and send back whatever it returns. So this whole back and forth, that's what we call the request-response cycle. Your browser makes a request, Flask catches it, looks for the function with the matching decorator. We call that a view function, by the way. It runs that function, and then it sends whatever it spits out right back as a response. And that's the key, right? The view function's one and only job is to return something that Flask can send to the browser.
Now, here's a little detail that trips people up sometimes, but it's super important. The trailing slash at the end of a URL. Flask has a pretty smart way of handling this. A URL without a slash, like /about, is treated kind of like a file. If you try to go to /about with the slash, you'll just get an error. But if you define your route with a slash, like /stocks, Flask thinks of it like a folder. It's basically telling you, hey, there could be more stuff in here, like /stocks/1 or whatever. And the cool part is, if a user just types /stocks, Flask will automatically redirect them to /stock/ for you. Pretty neat.
Okay, so building a few static pages is one thing. That's great for a small personal site. But what happens when you need to go big? What about an app that needs to scale for thousands of users or blog posts? Let's get into that. I mean, seriously, can you imagine a site like a huge blog or a social network? Are you really going to write a new function for every single user? At app.root/user/Alex? At app.root/user/Jane? No way, that would be a complete and utter maintenance nightmare. And this is exactly the problem that dynamic routing was created to solve. And this, my friends, is where Flask really starts to shine. By popping a variable name inside those little angle brackets, right there in the URL, we've created what's called a dynamic route. What we're telling Flask is, hey, match anything that comes in this part of the URL. So whether it's user/Alex or user/Sarah, that piece of the URL gets captured and passed right into our function as an argument. Just like that, we've got one function handling a potentially infinite number of pages. But wait, it gets even better. Flask actually lets us specify what kind of data we're expecting in that URL. By default, it's just a string, but we can tell it to only accept, say, an integer or a number with a decimal, or even these things called UUIDs. This is incredibly handy for stuff like post IDs, where you should only ever get a number. You see that little int part? That's called a converter. By adding that, we're basically putting a bouncer on our route. We're telling Flask, look, only let this request through if the post ID is a whole number. So if someone tries to get clever and types /post/hello, Flask doesn't even bother running our code. It just says, nope, not found, and gives them a 404 error. It's a super simple and effective way to validate your input right at the front door. Okay,
So up to this point, we've only been getting pages, just viewing them. But what about when the user needs to send us data, like when they're filling out a login form or submitting a comment?
Right. So by default, every route we've created so far only listens for what's called a GET request. That's the standard request for just retrieving data. But to handle something like a form submission, we need to be able to accept a POST request. So we have to explicitly tell our route to allow that. For a long time, the standard way to do this was to add this methods list right into the decorator, like you see there on the left. And that still works. But since Flask 2.0, there are these much cleaner, much more readable shortcuts. Instead of the generic @app.route, you can just use @app.post or @app.put or @app.delete. They do the exact same thing, but it's way clearer just by looking at it what that function is supposed to be doing. It's definitely the way to go now. Okay, so our app is getting more complex. We have different routes, different methods, and this brings up a really important best practice. How do you link all these pages together in a way that doesn't break every time you want to change a URL? The answer is Flask's amazing little helper function, URL_for. Its whole purpose in life is to build URLs for you so you never have to type them out by hand again.
So why is this such a big deal? Well, let's say you have a link to /login scattered across 10 different templates in your app. And then one day you decide, you know what, I want to change that to /signin. Now you've got to go on a scavenger hunt and find and replace every single one of those links. Talk about a recipe for disaster. But if you used URL_for, you'd just change the one @app.route decorator and boom, all your links would update automatically. It's a lifesaver.
Now, the key thing to wrap your head around is how this thing works. You don't give it the URL path itself, like /user/Alex. Instead, you give it the name of the Python function that handles that route, in this case, showUser, along with any variables that route needs. Flask then does the magic of looking up the correct URL path for that function and building the whole thing for you. It's just so much cleaner and more robust.
And there you have it. That's a wrap. We've gone from a simple hello world all the way to understanding the complete foundation of routing in Flask. You've got all the tools now to build a solid application with static pages, dynamic pages that can scale up, and you know how to handle different user actions and link everything together like a pro.
But as your app gets bigger and bigger, even with all these great tools, just dumping every single route into one giant file, well, that starts to get messy fast. And that leads us to our final big question. Once you can build all these complex routes, how do you keep them organized? The answer, and really the next level of Flask architecture, is a concept called blueprints. It's a way to group your routes into neat little components. But that's a story for another explainer. Thanks for joining.